Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Dennis Knight, and I will be your moderator for this morning's proceedings. I want to welcome you to the inaugural press conference of the Integrity Commission. We are here before you on this occasion specifically because the United Nations International Day observing anti-corruption will be marked this week, Thursday 9th. December 9th each year is marked as International Day Against Corruption or Anti-Corruption Day. I want to say a special welcome to the members of the media who are here for this, what will be a short but significant press conference. I want to also acknowledge the presence of the members of the Nevis Integrity Commission, who I can see in the audience as well. I want to, of course, acknowledge the presence of our own staff from our office, the Chief Executive Officer, and our office manager. This morning at the head table is the chairperson of the Integrity Commission, former Justice Pauletta Lands, who I would hope in one way is a stranger to all of us, that we haven't had to see her before in any official capacity. But at the same time, I know she's no stranger because of the work she has done in the community, in the legal sphere. Everybody, I think, refers to when Justice Lands was one of our premier librarians in the country. She's worked in the court circles, in the registrar's office, and so on for many years. And so I would like to acknowledge her presence here with us as chairperson of this commission. With her, seated on her left, is Mrs. Carol Boddy, who is one of the commissioners on the Integrity Commission. There are two commissioners who have been appointed. Mrs. Boddy, who is a chartered accountant, is one of them, and yours truly, Dennis Knight, is the second. This morning, you will hear from primarily Chairperson Lands, and Mrs. Boddy will also have a few words and some information, I think, to add to that. We will take your questions from the press, and then we want to stop and have the official launch of one of the activities which we are planning for to mark the anti-corruption events, and then we'll go back as necessary to a second round of questions and then wrap up from there. As usual, those of you who have been here in the press conferences before, you would know the normal protocol. As you get up to ask a question, you say who you are, who you represent, and all of that, and then pose your question. But we'll repeat that at the time. So, without further ado, I'd like to invite Chairperson of the Integrity Commission, former Justice Pauletta Lands, to make her opening statement. Justice Lands.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Good morning to all our listening and viewing audience. our distinguished members of the press, distinguished colleagues, I recognize the Nevis or Nevis counterparts in the persons of Mr. Ricardo Keynes, chairperson of the Nevis Integrity Commission. Along with him is Commissioner Alfred Tyrrell, Mr. Newton, the third commissioner, is absent today. I recognize Ms. Ursula Lake and Ms. Javel Molly, also from the Nevis Integrity Commission. I think that comprises their managerial team. Ladies and gentlemen, the Integrity Commission is pleased to be hosting this inaugural conference as part of its activities to mark International Anti-Corruption Day 2021. Since the year 2005, International Anti-Corruption Day has been observed across the world annually on the 9th of December. In order to fight corruption, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the United Nations Convention Against Corruption on the 31st of October 2003. However, in the year 2005, the UN General Assembly designated 9th December as International Corruption Day to raise awareness of corruption and of the role of the convention in combating and preventing corruption. This year's commemorative theme of Anti-Corruption Day, is Your Right, Your Role, Say No to Corruption. Here in St. Kitts, the Integrity Commission has adopted this year's commemorative theme, but we have also adopted last year's commemorative theme, which was United Against Corruption, as our intention is to adopt a unified approach towards the fight against corruption. So in this regard, we would wish to engage everyone, all stakeholders, in the fight against corruption, including government officials, civil society organizations, non-governmental organizations, companies, students, who are the future generation. And yes, the media has a leading role to play. I did mention the United Nations Convention. Notably, St. Kitts and Nevis is one of the state parties to the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. By ratifying this convention, St. Kitts and Nevis obligated to put mechanisms in place to fight corruption. In 2004, St. Kitts and Nevis ratified an earlier convention against corruption. That convention is the OAS, Inter-American Convention Against Corruption, which came into force since 1997. The purpose of that convention are to promote and strengthen the development by each of the state parties of the mechanisms needed to prevent, detect, punish, and eradicate corruption. And B, to promote, facilitate, and regulate cooperation among state parties to to ensure the effectiveness of measures and actions to prevent, detect, punish, and eradicate corruption in the performance of public functions and acts of corruption specifically related to such performances. Significantly, in 2003, a monitoring mechanism was established to ensure state parties perform their obligations under the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. This mechanism is known as MECISIC, which stands for Mechanism for the Implementation of the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption. Notably, under MECISIC, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, state parties agreed to a review process whereby each state party responds from time to time to a standard format questionnaire. The review process also includes an on-site visit or on-site visits to assess the actions taken by state parties in implementing the convention provisions and the recommendations of MECISIC. Accordingly, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, having signed on to MECISIC in the year 2010, would have been subject to rounds of reviews to determine whether it is upholding convention obligations. The Commonwealth has played a major role in all of this. A significant role in the fight against corruption. I will just highlight a few taken by the Commonwealth. In 2013, the Commonwealth Charter was adopted, in which Commonwealth heads of governments, including St. Kitts and Nevis, reaffirmed the core values and principles of the Commonwealth, which include good governance. This reaffirmation is contained in Article 8 of the Charter, which reads as follows. We reiterate our commitment to promote good governance through the rule of law, to ensure transparency and accountability, and to root out both at national and international levels systemic and systematic corruption. A feature of the work of the Commonwealth is its support for small jurisdictions like St. Kitts and Nevis. This is well illustrated by, among other things, the development of a model law on integrity in public life, which assists small Commonwealth jurisdictions enact legislation, providing for, amongst other things, provision for a code of conduct for public officials and asset declaration, as well as detailing offenses constituting abuse of process, misconduct, and neglect of duty. It also contained provisions for the establishment of an integrity commission. At the Law Ministers' Conference for Small Commonwealth Jurisdictions in September 2013 in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the law ministers endorsed the Model Act. Now, as we are well aware, and it is well documented, that corruption is a global issue, a serious global issue. No country is immune. Many organizations have referred to corruption as a cancer. The World Bank, for example, in 2009, described corruption, saying, corruption is a cancer and no country, rich or poor, is immune. This means no country is safe from corruption. It affects everyone. Research has shown that corruption influences politics, business, sports, healthcare, education, and many more. Research has also shown that one of the biggest effects of corruption is that it hampers development. Due to corruption, the wealth is not properly distributed. The funds released by government for development purposes do not reach the people it is intended to reach, such as poor people. Because of corruption, many deserving people do not get jobs and admissions to universities and schools because these places are already corrupted by favoritism. Further, research has shown that corruption especially harms the poor because they are the ones most in need of public goods and services. But they cannot obtain goods and services because they cannot pay a bribe. According to United Nations, a staggering US $1 trillion are paid in bribery every year, while more than 2 times that, US $2.6 trillion, is stolen annually through corruption. Little wonder that this year, the United Nations started a 6-week campaign against corruption. Now, so far I have stressed the international anti-corruption conventions and organizations, and now the question arises as to whether there is a regional anti-corruption body, and the answer is yes. In 2015, national authorities from 12 Commonwealth countries in the Caribbean joined forces in Grenada to establish a new regional body to enhance transparency and to help fight corruption. That regional body is known as the Commonwealth Caribbean Association of Integrity Commissioners and Anti-Corruption Bodies. The establishment of the CCAIC-ACB, as it is called, was spearheaded by Dr. Roger Coranteng, advisor and head public sector governance of the Commonwealth Secretariat in London. The association is made up of national integrity commissions from Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Trinidad and Tobago. Significantly, in its annual conference held virtually on the 30th of June to the 1st of July this year, Mr. Ricardo Keynes, the chairman of the Nevis Integrity Commission, and yours truly, were elected on the executive of the association. Coming back to the Integrity Commission, does it have a mandate to join the global fight to prevent or combat corruption? I think the answer is yes. The Integrity Commission was established under Section 11 of the Integrity in Public Life Act, which entered into force in 2018. It is a 3-member commission comprising yours truly as chairperson, Mrs. Carol Boddy, public chartered accountant, and Mr. Dennis Knight, consultant and court-connected mediator. The Commission's management team comprised Mr. Albert Edwards, the former director of Audit, who is the CEO, and Ms. Virginia Brown as the Office Administrator and the Secretary to the Commission. Our offices are located upstairs the Lil Walwyn and Company building on Liverpool Row in Bastille. By Section 18C of the Integrity in Public Life Act, the Commission is assigned the function of conducting an investigation into any allegation of bribery or act of corruption referred to it by any person. In addition, the Commission is granted by the Act substantial powers of prevention, detection, and punishment of corruption. The Commission's mission statement is to build and promote a culture of integrity and accountability without fear or favor, affection or ill will, to help build and strengthen public trust and confidence in elected officials, members of the National Assembly, ministers of government, senators, Speaker of the National Assembly, and those public officials and all other persons, statutory bodies, and state enterprises to whom the integrity in public life applies. The Commission's vision statement. Our vision is to become the leading organization in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis in ensuring honesty and integrity in public officials and in establishing a society free from vice and corruption. So it is against all this background and in the context of our mandate under the IPL Act and by virtue of our membership to the CCAI-CACB that we feel emboldened and well-placed to join forces with institutions, organizations, and citizens around the world to do our little part domestically in our little corner of the world to raise awareness and promote the fight against corruption. In other words, we are conducting the domestic effort of the global fight against corruption. Our commemorative activities include a church service which we attended yesterday at the Antioch Baptist Church. The Commission and some of its invitees, including the Governor General, who was represented by the Governor General's Deputy, Mr. Michael Morton, CBE, Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, Prime Minister, the Deputy Director of the Financial Services Regulatory Commission, FSRC, Ms. Tevens Coker and her team. They were all present, along with Mr. Kevin Hope, the Executive Director of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce. I should note that the church service was preceded by a visit to selected schools to speak to the students of fifth and sixth graders, on the topic of corruption. We were forced to bring forward this event because on the 16th of November, because of the time for the closure of schools. We felt compelled to speak to the young people because they are the future generation who one day will be running this country and will have to battle the issue of corruption. There's one other event that was canvassed, but we were forced to reschedule that event to January 2022, and it is an essay competition. You will hear more about that during this press conference. A panel discussion on the theme, Your Right, Your Role, is planned for early January or early in the year 2022, not necessarily January, but we are looking at January. On Thursday, 9th December, Anti-Corruption Day, there will be a broadcast of the Anti-Corruption Day message by the UN Secretary General. And we hope to be distributing paraphernalia, promotional materials such as brochures, leaflets, etc. That would basically end our activities to mark International Corruption Day 2021. But it does not end our public education efforts to raise awareness of corruption. We intend to continue those efforts, designing outreach and public education programs to sensitize public officials and to help them understand what is expected of them under the Integrity in Public Life Act. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my remarks. I trust that I have said enough to have enlightened you and have brought some clarity to any doubts that you may have had in relation to the Commission and its functions. I thank you very much for your attention, and I await any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Chairperson Lands. And so I'm hoping that you are beginning to grasp the girth of what we have here before us, not only in terms of this week and this Anti-Corruption Day, December 9th, coming up, but also just in terms of the whole question of corruption and anti-corruption, the work that anti-corruption, that commissions, integrity commissions have to face. Some of you, I'm sure, would have, in the press, would have been following, interestingly, the Pandora Papers, the newsbreak about the Pandora Papers about a month or two ago. Remember when that came out? And that, of course, only now comes on the back of a few years ago. You remember the Panama Papers. And some of you remember that coming out of the Panama Papers, St. Kitts Nevis was highlighted in there. It even spawned that movie, what was it called? The Laundromat or something like that. So that we in our, although small corner of the world, are touched by this too. We are not left alone simply because we go, oh, you're small and you're in the Caribbean and you're just a few thousand people. No, it is everywhere. And sometimes, especially because of who we are very vulnerable. So this is a really important matter that we all have to work together, and hence, of course, the appropriateness of the theme, your right, your role, say no to corruption. I'm going to ask Mrs. Boddy if she has any words to add to those of Chairperson Lands, and perhaps for you to talk a little bit about that wonderful interaction that we had with the children a couple of weeks ago. Commissioner Boddy.
Good morning. Let me first adopt the protocol that was so ably established prior. But I would also like to say a special welcome to our counterparts from Nevis, Mr. Keynes, Mr. Tyrrell, and the staff of the Nevis Integrity Commission Office. As was mentioned, we reached out to the primary schools, grades 5 and 6. It was our intention to use this week to reach out to them, but the students are no longer in school. We learned that they were leaving last week, so we had to fast track our presentations to the school. We visited 3 schools: the Keon Primary School, the Dr. William Connor Primary School, and the ICCS, Immaculate Conception Co-Cathedral School. I must say, as a former teacher, it went down well. The students were really enthused by our presentation. At one school that I went to, I was most pleasantly surprised when those students showed up with their notebooks to take notes. They took notes, they answered our questions, they even had questions themselves. And it did us, we felt proud, because, as was said earlier, they are our future. And if we want to teach them about anti-corruption and the effects of corruption on society, who is best placed to start with? And so we started with grades 5 and 6 of these schools. I don't want the other schools to feel left out, because we intend to get to them next year. As our theme says, your right, your role, say no to corruption, we need to instill in our young people that they have a right to live in a society that's free from corruption, and that they also have a role to play in ensuring that we try or we stamp out corruption, because they are the most vulnerable persons in the society, and the impact of corruption, they are impacted most or hardest by corruption. So that was Keon Primary School, the reception at the ICCS, the reception at the Dr. William Connor. As I said earlier, it was tremendous. And so that's our first foray into reaching out to our young people, and we plan to continue. Later on, I will give more information as to what we have planned next for our young people. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Wadi. You know, one of the things that came to mind as Mrs. Wadi was speaking about interacting with the children, the United Nations also has a broader theme which is active and actively using, and that is corruption begets more corruption and fosters a corrosive culture of impunity. And you know, when we look around our society and the way we see certain things happen, and sometimes the expectation that certain persons would have of leaders in the society, certain persons would have of each of us, and you can feel that corrosion. You know it is important that we do attack this from the very young. and make sure then that it transcends all through life. And this is the only way it's going to be done. Interestingly, our CEO, Mr. Edwards, already gave me some anecdote about actually running into one of the students and the parent of one of the students who had been in those some of those discussions that we had with the children, and it's amazing already. I mean, even from that, and the child did remember our very basic message, which we highlighted in our meetings with the children, which was do the right thing. Do the right thing. And it got through. And so some days afterwards, the child was able to meet with Mr. Edwards and remind his parent, or her, was it a he or her? Remind her parent that the important thing is to do the right thing. So that's where it begins. All right, I'm going to thank Chairperson Lands and Commissioner Body for their presentations. And I'm now going to invite the press to proffer their questions to the Commission. And so we're going to, just let me move across the microphone here.
This is the one he should have. Which one? You want? Oh, okay. Oh.
Yeah.
Good morning, Commissioners. Good back from.
Turn on your mic. It's on. It's on.
Morning, Commissioners. Going back from SK News 9. Could you kind of outline for us what has been some of your priority areas over the past year, and what can we expect from the Commission coming up in 2022 in terms of your work program?
Could you repeat the first part of the question? What are the priority areas? What happened?
Priority areas over the past year and the work program. So.
Can you answer that? Go ahead.
Yeah.
All right, so Commissioner Body will.
Thank you for your question. As was said earlier, the commission was established in 2018. During that time, one of our main focus was in getting a place, our offices established. And so we did manage to locate a place, the upstairs of Delale Walwyn on Liverpool Road. Having gotten that, we now had to focus on outfitting it, put it in the necessary infrastructure so that we can function in a comfortable environment. Initially, we had no furniture, and so we used a folding table and some chairs that was borrowed from one of our commissioners. And we were able to, and a printer as well, and we were able to host a visit by the Governor General using those facilities. But I'm happy to say that our offices are now outfitted and we are ready to function at any time. One of the things we've also worked on is a website we've hired a service provider whose task is to create and manage not only our website, but our social media platform, which we've already established. We've also taken time out to review our act so that we become quite knowledgeable about it and we can answer questions, or we can act understanding clearly what our mandates are. So that, in a nutshell, is what our priority areas have been since we started. Okay? What was the other part of your question?
What can we expect from the Commission during...
Okay.
What can we expect from the Commission during 2022 in terms of your work program?
One of the things we intend to do is to launch or to continue our information process. We cannot have policies or laws without making sure that the persons who these acts cover are fully aware of their roles and what is required under these acts. So we intend to have many informational sessions with the stakeholders, and when we say stakeholders, we're not only speaking about those persons to whom the act applies, but the public, because if the public is not aware of what is required, if they are not knowledgeable, if they are not informed, how can they report something which they don't know is considered wrong? So we would intend to have informational sessions. We intend to have our website and our social media platforms operating with timely information.
I also want to just embellish that a little bit to say that when you think of the Integrity in Public Life Act, legislation like this does not really stand on its own. If we're thinking about corruption, anything, bribery, fraud, all of these things and so on, the best approach to fighting them, this type of thing, is a sort of multi-dimensional approach across the spectrum of organizations, whether it and offices, whether it be from the Attorney General's office, whether it be from the DPP's office, whether it be the Integrity in Public Life Act. We've heard of the things like Proceeds of Crimes Act, etc., etc. A broad number of things. So that one of the important things that we did during last year, it took us quite a few months, is to sort of go through the legislation with a fine-tooth comb and identifying all the various areas where we thought that the act needed support in any way, either A, by regulations, like if it says persons are supposed to declare their assets and so on. How do they do this? And in what manner? And what is acceptable and what is not acceptable and all of that and so on. But if somebody is not compliant, how can we react? And how is that to be done and so on? And if somebody, for instance, is acting in some corrupt way, is our act sufficient? Is there a loophole? And if so, is there further legislation that we can recommend to government that we thought that would be helpful? Like, for instance, legislation about unexplained wealth. How does this person, come by all this wealth, and this is totally unexplained and so on. And so this was a major part of our undertaking during the last year, apart from the you know, the things like really setting up of office and the website, and you see our logo here, and so on. But quite a significant amount of work was undertaken in that review. There's a question here.
Good morning, Jeremy Abel. I just want to get first up. For the last three and a half, 4 years, since 2018, I don't want to sound rude, but the commission has basically been doing the groundwork and not much of the substantial work that it was mandated to do, based on what you're saying.
That is quite correct. We have been positioning ourselves to become fully operational. We are not yet fully operational.
So then, I'm not sure how you guys can respond to these questions, but one, has the commission received any reports or any reports have been forwarded to the commission for investigation with regards to whether it be bribery, corruption, or anything of that nature? And also, has all the officials, whether it be government, opposition, those within the public sphere, been disclosing their assets on time to the commission? And finally, to Mr. Knight, you spoke about the issue with Pandora Papers and the Paradise Papers and all these. Has the commission received or is suspected of that happening in the Caribbean? Well, not in the Caribbean, but in St. Kitts and Nevis, or St. Kitts and Nevis being part of that? And do you believe that small island nations such as St. Kitts and Nevis and leaders of nations like these are targeted by these bigger firms, bigger companies, those influential players within the region?
Those are very good questions. In relation to the question as to whether we are able to, or whether we have received any complaints or allegations of corruption, the answer is no. As far as I'm aware, the Commission has never received any complaint or any allegation of corruption. No complaint of an act of bribery or any allegation of corruption, that's as far as I know. In relation to the disclosing of assets by public officials, we are unable to reach that point. And interestingly, as has been mentioned before, that is one of our core mandates. Actually, Section 18 of the Act lists the functions of the Commission: to receive, examine, and retain all declarations filed pursuant to the provisions of the Act, make such inquiries as it considers necessary in order to verify or determine the accuracy of any declarations filed pursuant to the Act. See, as I mentioned before in my remarks, without prejudice to the provisions of any other enactment, conduct an investigation into any allegation of bribery or act of corruption under the Act referred to it by any person. Perform any other functions as may be required pursuant to the provisions of this Act or any other enactment. Now, in relation to any other enactment, Mr. Knight has just mentioned that the Act does not, or the Integrity in Public Life Act does not stand on its own. There are other acts which might be associated with it, including the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act. Now, coming back to the disclosure of assets by public officials. It is a fact that that has not happened. It is a fact that unless action is taken under Section 5 of the Integrity in Public Life Act, it cannot happen. Under Section 5, a public official shall, within a period of time to be prescribed by order, complete and file a declaration with the Commission of his or her income, assets, liabilities, and private interests, and thereafter the public official shall, in each succeeding year that he or she continues to be a public official, file further declaration of his or her income, assets, liabilities, and private interests. So public officials are required to file annually. However, as I've said before, there's a prerequisite. The order, which we call Section 5 order, will have to be made. It has not been promulgated at all. That Section 5 order. That is the order which creates the obligation for public officials to file their declarations of assets, income, liabilities, or income, assets, liabilities. So our hands are tied there because that order has not been made, that Section 5 order. So no obligation, there's no obligation on the part of public officials to file any declaration with the Commission, unfortunately.
Is it a legislative requirement?
It is. Section 5 of the Integrity of Public Life Act.
Okay, let me clarify. Are you saying that there is need for additional legislation to support the main legislation? Is that what you're saying on that particular point?
There is need for what we call an SR&O, statutory rule and order. There's need for an SRO to say when public officials should start to file their declarations with the Commission.
So outside of that, then the commission has no teeth to mandate the politicians, the legislators, the parliamentarians to file their incomes and so forth.
That is correct. We have no authority to do so. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And then I think the second part of the question was whether or not we've received any sort of report and that the Pandora Papers and these sorts of things.
And
are we targeted?
small island leaders and small island nations targeted.
Okay. You know, as I said a while ago, remember that the Panama Papers didn't leave us out, and we did become a part of that whole matter of the Panama Papers. And I said, even down to the fact that we even had a movie, The Laundromat, which was not kind to us really as a nation. But yes, do we know of any specific case or anything like that? No, of course, nothing like that has been reported to us. But what happens is that around the world, what people would consider as vulnerable jurisdictions, small jurisdictions, perhaps with legislation that is not as tight as it might be in other areas, or even if it's not as tight, because in some cases we do have legislation which is even better than legislation in some of the larger countries, and even some of the countries who will sometimes ban us from this and blacklist us from that and so on. But that we just don't have the kind of clout, or in fact our jurisdictions are safe haven tax safe havens and so on. Safe havens for people who accumulate wealth, to be able to stash it away here, stash it away there, and so on. And so in that way, yeah, we are sort of natural for them to come and seek. So that you have, whether it is at St. Kitts Nevis, or whether it is at Cayman Islands, or Bahamas, the British Virgin Islands, even in places like the United Kingdom, Jersey and Guernsey and all these little places and so, these are the jurisdictions which become targeted. And right now out in sort of Asia Pacific is becoming one of the targeted areas. Okay, we have another question.
Yes. Mervyn Thompson, ZIZ. It's funny that you would have mentioned just now tax havens, because one of my questions was regarding how do we balance that, because countries revel in the revenue and the income that is generated from that. But if the IC is to police sort of these networks, then how does the IC and government officials draw the line with the revenue that is generated from it for the prospective countries? Also, not to sound rude, but am I gathering correctly when the perspective that essentially the IC is to be a big stick sort of over the government's back as it relates to the declarations of the proceeds and so forth for the persons who the act target? And if that is the case, then how does the IC and government draw the line with what they declare and how they declare? Because essentially the IC is, when they declare their assets, would that be public? One question. Number two, if I am a sitting minister and I would have to declare all of this about myself, what incentive would I have, or why would I go to the House to pass a law to make this thing public when there are things that I would want to keep hidden? What's the incentive for governments, for countries to enact this, although they have signed on to ratifying all of these conventions and so forth? What punishment sort of is in place to, or what can be put in place to enact Section 5, as Justice Lands said, and to assist with all of these conventions that we've signed on to and ratified, essentially saying, yes, we agree to this, and yes, we want to see this. But on the legal, on the country level, maybe not just yet, we could wait, but yes, this is what we want. So how do you, I don't know, how does it play out in the regular sphere, in me understanding that 1 + 1 is 2? And as it relates to the Commission and government, also, what are the procedures in place for persons to declare?
All right. Number of really good questions. We said that we are having a panel discussion early next year. You sounds like you could be one of the panelists. Yeah, I love this. And thank you, Miss Thompson. I'm going to let Commissioner Body respond to this. I just want to, for clarity, note that, just to be sure that people understand, the declarants are not just the ministers of government, the politicians. The schedule includes, I mean, it's public officers, okay? So you'll find senior persons above a certain grade level in government and all of that, and even in statutory bodies and whatnot and so on, all right? So it goes even beyond the politicians. Some of what you ask, I'm not sure if you ask the right people, because, and you understand what I mean by that, that's sort of a government and governance kind of issue with those persons. And then if you refer back to our our mandate, our what are the functions that the chairperson just spoke to receive declarations, to make inquiries to determine the accuracy of declarations, to conduct investigations, and then to perform other functions and so on. So we have a certain scope within which the IC will act, and then other organs of government and so on will take up the rest of it. But I'll have Miss Boddy.
I will start with the easier question, which was, what incentive does the government have to publish the SR&O? We're talking here about good governance. It's a word we've heard so much about. And so, in the interest of good governance, that's the incentive. But even more so, voters, the general public has an important role. They are the ones who are supposed to, what should I say, police the government. Because at the end of the day, it benefits us as taxpayers when there is good governance, and when there is little to no corruption. It would mean, or it could mean, that government's budget would be reduced. Its revenue, they wouldn't need so much money, they wouldn't need to spend so much money on expenses, which translate in less tax for us. Because if we can control our expenditure, and some research have estimated that about a half of a country's budget is consumed in bribe and other corrupt activities. So, first and foremost, the voters, we need to be knowledgeable. We need to be able to speak to our representatives, and we need to hold them accountable. So that's the easy question. With regards to public declarations, are they available to the public? Section 40 clearly says, the declaration filed with the Commission and the records of the Commission in respect of those declarations are secret and confidential and shall not be made public. That's subsection 1. Subsection 2 says, subsection 1 shall not apply where a particular declaration or record is required to be produced for the purpose of or in connection with any court proceeding against or inquiry in respect of a declarant under this act. Okay? So that's the answer to your question. They are not available to the public, but if they're required in a court proceedings, we have to provide them. I don't think the Integrity Commission is intended to police government or to police transactions within our economy. That is why we have the Financial Services Regulatory Commission, the Financial Intelligence Unit, and the White Collar Crime. They are there to ensure that the relevant acts that speak to corruption, money laundering, the Proceeds of Crime Act, that's their role. Our job, our mandate, is to ensure that our public officials and persons in our statutory bodies comply with the code of conduct that's embedded in the Act. And if they do that, we should see a drastic reduction in corruption within our federation.
So essentially, public and government officials and whomever else the act target speaks to, they file with the IC and the buck stops there. So should the public, essentially we should be assured that when they file and the IC oversees it, then we assume that everything is well. How does it pan out in the public? How, I'm trying to gather how.
Yes, go on.
How do we investigate? Yes, how do we, because favoritism could be a part of this. Government officials and IC and everybody knowing everybody, it's a small circle in St. Kitts Nevis. So what assurance does the public have that when they file, whatever the commission sees, it's okay and it would reduce corruption, as Mrs. Body alluded to? Sorry, and taxes to reduce the budget and so forth.
Well, let me say, preventing corruption would be one of the results of the completion of the declarations that we expect public officials to file. If we get the declarations and they have been completed, or they are not completed properly, we can call in the declarants and ask for explanations. If they are unwilling to explain, then the Act gives us, or the Act empowers us to refer certain matters to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Now, we do not want to get to that point, because if it gets to that point and we have to do, public prosecution means bringing an action against the offender. That is going to be very costly. It's going to deplete our little funds that we get. The investigation can take years. And it's going to be costly because it might entail bringing in an expert investigator, and we will have to pay out of the funds that they give us. That will deplete our funds. So it is important that we try to prevent, and one of the ways we can prevent is to put the Section 5 order in place, let the declarations be filed, let the incomes and assets and liabilities be declared. Let us do the preliminaries before they get to the DPP, because they would be required to answer the questions, and they would be required to answer them properly and do not put anything wrong inside of them. We have the authority to call them in, question them. Why did you say not applicable? How come you said this year and the next year you're saying something else? They have to explain, because they're raised, those red flags are raised there. So those declarations are important, and they need to be filed. Things have to be put in place for them to be filed. So we would want not to have to go into a long investigation, because as I said, we don't have the money. It's going to deplete our little funds that they give us to do what we have to do. We have asked for funds. We never ever get what we ask for. And I don't know that we would be given funds to bring in investigator. It's out of the consolidated fund. So we need that Section 5 order so that the declarations can be filed. If red flags are raised, we deal with them accordingly.
Not that funding will deter us from doing our work. The work is still to be done.
To add to what Madam Chair said, it is not just receiving the declarations. The declarations will be analyzed to determine if there are any discrepancies or variances. Once that has been established, we will ask the declarant to come in and explain anything that has raised a red flag for us. If they're unable to provide satisfactory explanation, that is when we have the right to investigate. The Act gives us the right to investigate. And yes, funds might be a problem, but I don't think that will deter us from doing what we need to do. If we find during our investigations sufficient evidence of wrongdoing, breach of any of the terms of the Act, then that could be forwarded to the DPP for further prosecution, for further action. So it's not as if we don't have any, the Act doesn't provide for it. The Act also provides a fine for persons who fail to declare. We also have the right to publish the names of persons who have failed to declare. And again, this is in the public sphere. It would be gazetted. So it's up to the public to now look at the names and hold those persons to the fire. If they're your elected officials, if they're persons within government, there is what we call the check. And there's also the press, the fourth arm of government. You too have a role to play. Because when this thing comes out in the public sphere, you can act on it or you can choose to just ignore it.
Okay, a couple of follow-up questions. One, what's the expected time frame for ratification of Section 5? I know you said, basically legislation is needed, but have you guys been speaking with the government to move forward with Section 5? A question has to do specifically with a spin-off from Section 5. Our good friends from Nevis are here. I know they've been carrying out their work and so forth. How is Section 5, or the absence of proper working for the ratification of Section 5, impacting Nevis's section, or is that just something that's investigating federally? And I want to go back to the whole discussion surrounding speaking to declaration of assets. One, Mr. Abel decides he's going to file his assets, his declarations on the 1st of December. Section 5 is in place. He files that. What checks and balances are in place to say, Mr. Abel, your declarations for this year, or this year being 2022 being the base year, is not all of what you have as your assets, or some of the assets that you would have declared on your form is undervalued. Who is policing that? Because I know it's a ticklish matter. You don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole because you don't have the funds. But what is stopping me from undervaluing what I'm declaring? And how is the investigation? This is for the public's edification. How is the investigation process going to be undertaken when, or how is the process of reviewing the applications going to be undertaken when you begin to, especially in the base year, begin to review all of what was submitted by those applicants?
All right, couple of things. First, some housekeeping. I'm going to take this as the last question for now. I want to get on to Miss Boddy, and for her to do to speak of the launch of the essay essay competition, and then we'll come back and have a few wrap-up questions. All right. So let's see if I got you. First of all, once there's an SRO, or once there's the SRO, Mr. X won't decide he's declaring in what time. That the order will specify when declarations and so on are to be made, and the guidelines are to be there. 2, once the declarations are received, okay, they will, as Mrs. Body said, be gone through. They'll be analyzed for us to determine. So, in other words, I mean, by the fact that I said they're going to be analyzed, they're going to be analyzed by by competent people. All right, and notwithstanding the chairperson's concern about the funding and so on. Once an investigation needs to be done, then we'll have the competent investigative skills, talents, and so on to look into this, look into that, to determine whether we think we need to do follow-up questions, to ask, to call somebody in, to ask them specifics about the declaration that they did make, and all of that. Exactly what the procedure is right now, we won't be able to tell you that right now, because that is something that still needs to be developed. Exactly what the procedure and the specifics of the procedure is to be. How does it affect Nevis? The legislation governing the Nevis Integrity Commission and the legislation governing the Integrity Commission that you see here are 2 different pieces of legislation. One sitting within the Nevis Island Assembly, and then the legislation for sitting within the federal parliament here. All right. So I'm going to thank you for those questions, and I'm going to invite. Well, I'm going to invite Mrs. Body to move to the launch of the essay competition, and then we'll come back and entertain some more questions.
Okay.
As part of our educational outreach, we've decided to have an essay competition among the high schools within the Federation. Again, I'm very big on education and information and involving young people. This essay competition will be on the topic, corruption begets more corruption and fosters a corrosive culture of impunity. Topic, corruption begets more corruption and fosters a corrosive culture of impunity. It's geared towards students between the ages of 15 and 19, and they have a submission deadline of January 28th, 2022. So this is their Christmas gift to themselves. It should be between 1,200 and 1,500 words. 1,200 and 1,500 words. The presentation, like the font style, the size, that would be included in the information. Only 1 entry is allowed per student. 1 entry per student. We must emphasize, essay must be the student's original work. Again, no corruption, no plagiarism, your own work. Any essays that includes any plagiarized work will be disqualified. Okay? When we say it should not exceed 1,500 words, that does not include the word counts for the bibliography. So the text of the essay should not exceed 1,500 words. Now, in terms of the selection criteria, a committee of markers will first examine the entries and select from amongst them the 5 best entries. These will then be assessed by a selection committee to choose first place, a second place, and a third place winner. The criteria on which it will be evaluated, we're talking about the student demonstrating a comprehension of the central theme. There is coherence and structural organization within the work. They will be graded on the content and the creativity and the language style, the expression, and the clarity with which they express themselves. The winner will receive $750. The second place winner, the second place person, $500, and third place, $250. And that's within our limited budget that we have. The student must appear in person to deliver his or her item. And it can be delivered either at our office in the Dilil Walwyn building in St. Kitts, or the Nevis Integrity Office, which is in Rams Complex, Stony Grove, Nevis. These items, all of the entries, once submitted, become the property of the Integrity Commission. The winners will be, the winning essays will be posted on our website. So we have written to the Chief Education Officer to encourage him to encourage the schools to participate. We know it is Christmas and they're out. And we're also appealing to the public, the parents, even students to take it upon themselves and to participate in this. Who knows, it might be the basis of someone's SBA, because CXC now has SBAs for English A. It is also getting students geared towards engaging in topics that are of national interest, national importance. So we are urging the media, we are urging the parents, we are urging the educational officials to encourage persons to participate. We are encouraging the teachers, the CFBC, to encourage their students to participate in this worthwhile essay competition.
All right, thank you very much, Mrs. Boddy. Any questions surrounding the essay competition? Okay. All right, so let's do, I'll open perhaps for one question from any of the journalists here. Yes, Mr. Wyatt.
Yes, listening to all of you speak this morning, I can't help but have a sense of a situation where the commission is not going to be able to do its work effectively. If you're saying that, in a sense, you're underfunded for the kind of work that you need to do, if you're saying that there are certain important pieces of legislative work that still has to be done, and that depends on whether or not the appropriate bodies within the Parliament see it fit to do that, you could find yourself in a situation where you are in limbo land, where you really can't do anything about what you are set up to do. And so that leads now to another situation in which the general public will have very little confidence in the kind of work that you're doing. And because it is, the legislation is structured in such a way in which a lot of information is going to be kept out of the public domain, it means that you're going to have a tough battle convincing the general public that what you're doing is actually being effective. And I would like you all to comment on that.
All right, perhaps I can take that. I don't think the the intention was to convey an environment where we are just feeling underfunded for the work that we have to do. The funding has not been as much as we would have liked as we started. But as we have gone along, then the funding has increased. Okay? And if you look in the last estimates, we were up, we started somewhere at about $350,000, and I think at this point we're up to $750,000 per annum. And I believe as the work rolls in and the exigencies of what we have to do, as that expands and so on, then we expect that the budget would increase accordingly to what we have to do. At this moment, for instance, because we are not at the point yet where we're able to accept declarations and so on, we haven't hired the investigative skills and so on yet, because there's no point having somebody right now sit down in the office and there's nothing there to do. Obviously, once that happens and we have the declarations coming in, we're going to need those kinds of skills, and we expect to get the budget. Okay. In terms of the matter of the public not knowing, I believe that will come with the performance of the commission. The matter of the information not being made public, I mean, that's not going to be just St. Kitts or Nevis, all right? Generally speaking, anywhere you go within the Caribbean and this kind of legislation, once declarations are made, the actual private business of the permanent secretary or the assistant secretary, and you remember I said it's not just the politician running for office. It was one thing if you're just talking about the politician running for office, and we can say, well, we need to know all your business. Okay, but it's not just them. It's in the schedule. Let me see if I find the schedule. Just a minute there. Schedule 1. Members of the National Assembly, Ministers of Government, Speaker of the National Assembly, Heads of Diplomatic Missions, and so on. Commissioner of Police, Prisons, Armed Forces, Parliamentary Secretaries, Permanent Secretaries, Assistant Secretaries, Heads of Department in Government Ministries, Solicitor General and legal offices, chairpersons and board members of statutory bodies, directors and managers of majority state-owned or controlled banks, financial institutions, director of audit, chairpersons and executive members of political parties, declared candidates for political parties. All right? So it's a whole gamut of persons. And the matter of making their declarations public, no, the legislation in most of the jurisdictions don't allow that. What we can do each year is, as Mrs. Boddy said, if my memory serves me right, the legislation allows us to tell you whether they have declared or not declared. We can publish that, and then if there's a matter, as I said, that for us to deal with, then it will go to the director. We can refer that to the DPP or whoever and so on for prosecution and so on. But I don't really have any deep concerns about that. I think we will be able to do our work, so to speak. Okay? Any other question? Oh, you want to follow up?
With regards to Mr. Bart's question, I don't think it's accurate for him to say we are not doing anything. While we are waiting for the SR&O, we are actively working to position ourselves to be ready to get out of the starting block in terms of our declaration as soon as that is published. And that's where the public, again, your right, your role, you kind of pressure your parliamentarian. That's what you can do. We can only work once Parliament has done what needs to be done. We are willing, we are ready to work, but in the absence of the SRNO, we cannot receive any declarations. However, we also have a mandate to receive complaints that are credible, not frivolous. Somebody asked earlier, have you received any complaint? No. So, again, if persons are aware and they have to have proof, something that we can act upon, they can submit it to us. No frivolous complaint. You must have proof.
Okay, the chair wants to say.
I just wanted to expand a little bit on the answer given to the question as to whether Section 5 affects the Nevis Integrity Commission. The answer is that Nevis has its own ordinance, and I do not think the ordinance has the equivalent of our Section 5. So there's nothing to stop Nevis Commission from receiving declarations of income, assets, and liabilities. They have been accepting them, I think, for over 2 years now. Thank you.
All right, so this is the final question. Morgan?
Yes. If they've been receiving, are they able to analyze and carry out their work? And finally, recently there was an article by CVM Live in Jamaica, and the Minister of Justice, interestingly, he was saying, relating to IC and IPL, he was saying that it's basically an invasion of privacy. Can you comment on something like that locally, and if a person who the Act speaks to would allege something like that, where is the line drawn in terms of that invasion of privacy and them having to declare?
All right, in terms of the Nevis Integrity Commission, I would have to defer you to them. To answer that question, but I know, yes, they have been receiving, and what has been the outcome of the declarations. They would have to answer that themselves. Yes, and I believe we all would understand that people would feel an invasion of privacy. I think that's natural for any of us to have to declare. I mean, but if we are going to be public officials, and if our economic and political jurisdictions are going to work effectively, this is just something that we have to get accustomed to. Okay? I will even confess, in our review of the legislation, we noted in our review there was no requirement for the commissioners to file. And so we've said to government, but how come? We have to compel people to file, but then, can you say the natural question, have you all filed? So we have said to government, in one of our recommendations is that commissioners should be required to file, because it is just a requirement. We are going to have to get accustomed to transparency. It has been the nature of our economic, political, and just social jurisdictions that we don't say much. We speak in secrecy. We keep a lot of things. But if we are going to go forward, there is going to have to be a certain level of transparency in the way we conduct ourselves as public officials. And So I understand the comment, but it's something that we're going to have to go with. All right. Thank you very much for that question and for all the questions from the press. I think it was, in fact, a very intriguing engagement. I hope that we have helped. Mr. Bart, I hope that we can instill some confidence in you, if not this morning, as we go along. And that, of course, you'll come back and we'll engage continuously as time goes on. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for attending this morning's press conference, and we will, of course, be engaging with you again sometime in the new year. I want to thank everybody who's been involved this morning, the conference center, the people who are doing the live streaming and so on of this morning's press conference, the members of the Nevis Integrity Commission who attended. Thank you very much. Good morning.